Picture yourself walking through the painted halls of an ancient Egyptian tomb. The air is still, heavy with the silence of millennia, but the walls around you burst with life. You see a feast unfolding in vibrant color, figures in fine white linen, tables groaning with food, musicians playing, and there, atop the heads of every guest, sits a curious, pale, cone-shaped object. For centuries, we've looked at these images and wondered, were these perfume cones simply decorative, a strange fashion statement, or was there something far more profound resting on the brows of Egypt's elite? The truth is, these unassuming cones were the very essence of ancient luxury, a sophisticated fusion of art, science, and spirituality. They weren't just accessories, they were personal air conditioners, status symbols, and religious offerings all in one, a slow-release perfume system designed to transform an entire experience. This is the story we've been waiting to unravel. Today, we are embarking on a sensory expedition to answer the questions that have tantalized historians and perfume lovers alike. How did the ancient Egyptians actually create these iconic perfume cones? What mysterious ingredients did they source from the far corners of their world? And what was the secret technique that turned simple materials into a fragrant masterpiece that could last for hours under the hot Egyptian sun? This isn't just a history lesson, it's a journey back into the workshops and temples where scent was considered a language, a medicine, and a direct line to the gods. We are going to follow the entire process, from the harvesting of rare resins along the Nile to the precise, almost alchemical methods used to blend them into a solid, melting wonder. So prepare to have everything you thought you knew about these fragrant cones completely transformed. We are about to dive deep into the lost art of Egyptian perfumery, uncovering the recipes and rituals that made these cones so much more than a lump of perfumed fat. We will explore the cultural significance that elevated them to objects of necessity and desire, understanding why they were indispensable at every major life event, from birth to the journey into the afterlife. This is an exploration of human ingenuity, a testament to a civilization that understood the power of scent better than any other. Get ready to discover the incredible secrets of how the Egyptians made perfume cones, and in doing so, step directly into the scented world of the pharaohs. To truly grasp the ingenuity behind the perfume cone, we must first step away from our modern world and immerse ourselves in the aromatic landscape of ancient Egypt. Imagine the streets of Thebes not just as pathways of stone and sand, but as rivers of scent. The air would have been a complex tapestry of smells, the earthy aroma of baking bread from a mud-brick oven, the sharp tang of animal hides from a tanner's workshop, the dusty scent of papyrus from a scribe's stall. In such an environment, fragrance was not a simple indulgence. It was a necessity, a powerful tool for creating a bubble of personal purity and divine connection amidst the realities of daily life. For the Egyptians, a pleasant smell was synonymous with goodness, health, and holiness, while foul odors were associated with decay, disease, and evil. This fundamental belief elevated the perfumer's craft from a trade to a sacred art. When you wore a perfume cone, you weren't just masking odors, you were actively cultivating an aura of sanctity around your entire being. This practice was deeply rooted in their religion. Inside the towering stone temples, priests performed elaborate rituals where the burning of kai-fi incense, a complex blend of 16 or more ingredients like frankincense, myrrh, honey, and wine, was believed to create a bridge to the gods. The smoke carrying these sacred scents was thought to be nourishment for the deities, a pleasing aroma that maintained cosmic order. By adorning themselves with a personal, melting source of fragrance, the elite were essentially carrying a piece of that temple ritual with them wherever they went. It was a mobile affirmation of their piety and a constant reminder of their elevated status, setting them apart from the common person who could not afford such luxuries. The cone, therefore, was far more than a fashion accessory. It was a wearable symbol of one's place in the universe, a statement that the wearer was in harmony with the gods and the principles of Maat, the divine order that held chaos at bay. With that sacred purpose in mind, we arrive at the surprising and earthy reality of the cone's creation, a process that began not in a pristine temple laboratory, but in the most practical of places. The very foundation of this luxurious object was something far more humble: animal fat. To create a solid cone that would slowly melt and release its fragrance, the ancient perfumers needed a base that was both stable and malleable. They turned to tallow, a hard fat rendered from cattle or sheep. This choice was a stroke of practical genius. Tallow has a relatively high melting point, which was perfect for the Egyptian climate. It would remain solid until body heat and the warm air began their work, ensuring the perfume released gradually over many hours rather than all at once. But this wasn't just any leftover grease. The quality of the fat was paramount. It had to be pure, white, and as odorless as possible to avoid competing with the precious scents it would carry. The rendering process was a familiar, if pungent, domestic chore. We can see it illustrated on the walls of tombs where scenes of daily life were painted to ensure the deceased would have all they needed in the afterlife. Servants are shown carefully heating great pots of animal fat over a low fire. The key was a slow, gentle heat. If the fire was too hot, the fat would scorch, taking on a burnt, unpleasant smell that would ruin any fragrance added to it. As it simmered, the pure fat would slowly separate from any bits of tissue or membrane. These impurities would rise to the surface as a scum to be skimmed off or sink to the bottom, leaving behind a clear, liquid fat. Once cooled, this rendered tallow would solidify into a hard, clean block, the perfect blank canvas for the perfumer's art. This crucial first step reminds us that Egyptian luxury was built upon a foundation of profound practical knowledge, a deep understanding of the properties of everyday materials. However, the use of animal fat, while effective, was also a clear marker of one's place in the social hierarchy. For the common people, tallow was the accessible option, but for the elite, the nobility, the priests, the royalty, something far more exquisite was required. Their quest for purity and prestige led them to the botanical world, to substances that were not only functionally superior but also inherently fragrant. This is where we encounter the true artistry of the Egyptian perfumer, who began to experiment with plant-based solidifiers that transformed the humble cone into an object of rare luxury. The most prized of these was undoubtedly beeswax. Harvested from the hives along the Nile, beeswax was a remarkable material. It had a higher melting point than tallow, meaning a cone made primarily from wax would be far more resilient under the intense Egyptian sun, only beginning to soften when in direct contact with the warmth of the skin. More importantly, beeswax carried its own delicate, honeyed sweetness, a natural fragrance that would complement rather than overwhelm the expensive oils and resins added to the blend. Using a beeswax base was an immediate declaration of wealth and refinement. Another sophisticated alternative came from the resins of coniferous trees, substances like pine resin or the highly valued cedar resin, which often had to be imported from the famed forests of Lebanon. These resins were rock-hard at room temperature and would need to be gently heated with oils to become pliable. When used as a base, they contributed a sharp, clean, balsamic aroma that was deeply associated with cleanliness and sanctity. The scent of cedar, in particular, was believed to be pleasing to the gods and was used in purification rituals. So, a cone made with a cedar resin base was not just a perfume, it was a direct olfactory prayer. There is also compelling evidence to suggest that perfumers may have worked with solid plant oils, something akin to a primitive form of shea or cocoa butter. These fats, extracted from nuts or seeds, would have been softer than tallow or resin, but would have offered a neutral, creamy base that perfectly captured and released subtle floral scents. The choice of base material, therefore, became a sophisticated language of its own. A cone made with tallow was practical and effective, but a cone crafted from imported cedar resin and beeswax was a multisensory masterpiece. It spoke of international trade connections, of access to rare materials, and of a wearer who understood scent on a spiritual level. The base was no longer just a carrier. It was an integral part of the fragrant experience, the first note in a complex symphony that would unfold over the course of a celebration or ceremony. This attention to detail extended to the very consistency of the blend. A perfumer might combine beeswax for its holding power with a smaller amount of a prized oil to make the cone slightly more pliable, creating a custom texture that would melt at the perfect rate. This level of customization highlights that these were not mass-produced items but bespoke creations, tailored to the individual's preference, social standing, and even the specific occasion for which they were intended. Once the base was perfectly prepared, the true magic could begin with the addition of the fragrant oils and resins. This is where the Egyptian perfumer transformed a simple lump of fat or wax into something truly priceless, a concentrated essence of the known world. The aromatic palette available to these ancient artisans was astonishingly vast, a direct result of Egypt's position as the ultimate trading crossroads. Their workshops were like alchemical laboratories stocked with treasures brought by ship from the Horn of Africa, by caravan across the deserts of Arabia, and through complex trade networks that stretched all the way to India. Each substance carried not just a scent but a story, a geographic and cultural significance that added layers of meaning to the final creation. First, there were the beloved native scents, the aromatic signature of the Nile Valley itself. The blue lotus was perhaps the most iconic. More than just a flower, it was a powerful symbol of creation and rebirth, its intoxicating, sweet fragrance central to both festivities and religious ceremonies. Perfumers would painstakingly soak the petals in high-quality oils to create a fragrant infusion called enfleurage, capturing the very soul of the blossom. Henna flowers, with their earthy, slightly fermented aroma, provided another popular local note. Even the humble papyrus plant contributed a fresh, green, aquatic scent that evoked the life-giving marshes. These local ingredients created perfumes that smelled distinctly of Egypt, of its lush riverbanks and its deep spiritual connection to the natural world. But for the highest echelons of society, true luxury was defined by the exotic, by the scents that spoke of immense wealth and far-reaching power. Nothing illustrates this better than the legendary expedition to the land of Punt, famously recorded on the walls of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Punt was a mystical, almost mythical source of the most coveted aromatics, frankincense and myrrh. Frankincense, the dried resin of the boswellia tree, offered a scent that was clean, bright, and slightly lemony with a woody undertone. When burned as incense, its smoke was believed to carry prayers to the heavens, and when added to a perfume cone, it imbued the wearer with an aura of divine favor. Myrrh from the commiphora tree was its perfect counterpart, a deeper, richer, more bittersweet and medicinal. It was associated with mourning and embalming, but also with healing and purification. A cone that contained both frankincense and myrrh was therefore a complex statement, balancing the lightness of the divine with the gravity of mortality. The quest for fragrance pushed Egyptian traders further still. From the famed cedar forests of Lebanon came not just timber but precious cedar oil, extracted from the wood and prized for its sharp, balsamic, and incredibly long-lasting scent, a symbol of strength and eternity. Even more remarkably, traces of cinnamon have been found in ancient Egyptian contexts, a spice that could only have originated from Sri Lanka or India. The journey such a bark would have taken, passing through countless hands across thousands of miles, made it astronomically expensive. To wear a perfume cone scented with cinnamon was to announce that your influence and your wealth knew no earthly bounds. The perfumer's skill lay in blending these powerful scents into a harmonious whole. They understood that some aromas were top notes, perceived immediately as the cone began to melt, while others were base notes providing a deep, lasting foundation. A master perfumer might combine the immediate floral burst of lotus with the rising smoke of frankincense and the enduring earthy depth of myrrh, creating a scent that evolved throughout the day, telling a story on the skin of the wearer. This was the ultimate luxury, a personal, evolving fragrance experience that was also a wearable map of the ancient world's greatest trade routes. The real challenge, of course, was coaxing the soul of these precious plants, their fragile, volatile scent, into a form that could be captured and preserved. This required more than just mixing ingredients. It demanded a deep patience and an almost intuitive understanding of chemistry, a process where the perfumer acted as both scientist and artist. The workshop of a master perfumer would have been a fascinating place, a crossroads of raw nature and refined craft. Jars of every size, from small alabaster vessels to large pottery amphorae, would line the shelves, each containing a different stage of the precious transformation. The air itself would have been thick with a layered, complex aroma, a testament to the slow, patient work happening within. The most delicate and revered method for capturing the most fleeting of floral scents was a technique known as enfleurage. This was the pinnacle of the perfumer's art, reserved for blossoms like the sacred blue lotus or the lily, whose beautiful fragrance begins to fade the moment they are picked. The process was incredibly meticulous. First, the perfumer would take flat, neutral tiles of stone or wood and coat them in a layer of the highest quality, purified fat, often that precious, odorless tallow or a blend with beeswax. Then a layer of freshly picked petals would be carefully laid across the surface of the fat. These trays would be stacked and left in a cool, dark place for several days. Slowly, magically, the volatile aromatic molecules from the flowers would migrate into the fat, which acted like a sponge, absorbing the very essence of the blossom. After a few days, the now wilted, scentless petals would be removed and replaced with a fresh harvest. This patient exchange would be repeated over and over, sometimes for weeks, until the fat itself was utterly saturated with the flower's perfume, becoming what is known as a pomade. This pomade was the heart of the most exclusive and expensive perfumes, a concentrate of floral beauty that could then be blended into the cone's base. For hardier materials, the resins, woods, and spices that formed the backbone of many fragrances, a more robust technique was employed, maceration. This was the workhorse method of ancient perfumery. Imagine the perfumer taking lumps of golden frankincense tears or chips of fragrant cedarwood and gently crushing them with a mortar and pestle to increase their surface area. These crushed aromatics would then be placed into a jar of warm, liquid base oil, perhaps a high-quality Balanos oil pressed from the nuts of the balanites tree, which was prized for its stability and light scent. The jar would be sealed and left to sit in the sun for weeks or even months. The heat would coax the resins to dissolve and the woods to release their deep, resinous oils into the liquid, creating a powerfully infused oil. This method was like making a potent, fragrant tea where time and warmth did all the work of extraction. The resulting oil could be used as is, or the solid materials could be strained out, leaving behind a pure, scented liquid ready for blending. Once the perfumer had their collection of infused fats and oils, the final act of creation could begin, the blending. This was not a haphazard pouring of ingredients. It was a precise and sacred act. The master would slowly heat the chosen base, whether it was beeswax, tallow, or a combination, in a special vessel over a low flame until it was just soft enough to work with. Then, with the care of a painter mixing colors, they would begin to add the precious scented components. A measure of the lotus-infused pomade for its immediate floral burst, a drizzle of the frankincense macerated oil for its luminous quality, and perhaps a few drops of a rare myrrh tincture for depth and longevity. They would stir the mixture constantly, ensuring a perfect, homogeneous blend, all while judging the consistency. Too much oil could make the final cone too soft, too much wax could make it brittle. The goal was a pliable, firm paste that could be hand-molded into that iconic conical shape. This final recipe was a closely guarded secret, a signature blend that could define a perfumer's reputation for a lifetime, transforming raw, earthly materials into a fragrant masterpiece worthy of the gods. Now came the moment of truth in the perfumer's workshop, the delicate alchemy of blending. With the pure, rendered base gently warmed to a pliable state and the library of precious infused oils and pomades at hand, the artisan was poised to perform their magic. This was far more than a simple act of mixing. It was the creation of a living, breathing scent that would tell a story as it unfolded on the wearer's skin. We can imagine the perfumer approaching this task with the focus of a composer arranging a symphony, carefully considering how each aromatic voice would enter the composition. A clumsy blend would result in a muddy, indistinct fragrance, but a masterful one would produce a scent that transformed throughout the day, revealing new layers as the cone yielded to the warmth of the body. This sophisticated understanding of scent volatility, how some aromas evaporate quickly while others linger, suggests the Egyptians had an intuitive grasp of what modern perfumery calls top, middle, and base notes. A typical high-status recipe might have begun with the foundation, the base notes. These were the deep, rich scents that provided stability and longevity to the entire fragrance. The perfumer would likely start by incorporating a macerated oil of myrrh or cedarwood into the soft fat or beeswax. These resins and woods have heavy, tenacious molecules that evaporate very slowly, creating a lasting, earthy or balsamic foundation that would anchor the entire experience for hours. This base layer was the soul of the perfume, the constant, reassuring presence that would remain long after the first impressions had faded. Once the foundation was set, the perfumer would introduce the heart of the fragrance, the middle notes. This is where the character of the scent truly emerged. A generous portion of lotus-infused pomade would be swirled into the blend, its sweet, intoxicating floralcy serving as the central theme. This note would become prominent as the cone warmed, blooming on the skin and defining the primary personality of the perfume. To complement the lotus, the perfumer might add the bright, slightly citrusy aroma of frankincense, a middle note that would lift the entire composition and add a luminous spiritual quality. The heart notes were the emotional core of the cone, designed to be appreciated during the main hours of a celebration or ceremony. Finally, the most volatile and fleeting ingredients were added, the top notes. These were the scents designed to make a stunning first impression. A few drops of a fresh, green infusion made from papyrus or henna flowers could provide an initial burst of vitality, a crisp introduction that would quickly give way to the richer heart of the fragrance. The perfumer had to be extraordinarily careful with these potent top notes, as adding too much could overwhelm the more delicate balance of the heart and base. The goal was a harmonious chord where no single note dominated, but each appeared in its turn. The final test was the cooling of the blend. The perfumer would allow a small dab to harden on their wrist, then warm it again with their own skin heat, critically evaluating the sequence of scent release. These recipes were not written down for public consumption. They were the perfumer's most valuable intellectual property, secrets passed from master to apprentice, ensuring that a particular house's signature fragrance could endure for generations. The ability to craft such a complex, time-released sensory experience stands as a powerful testament to the advanced and deeply artistic nature of Egyptian perfumery. With a fragrant blend perfected, the perfumer's final task was one of sculptural artistry. Taking the warm, pliable mass of perfumed fat, wax, and oils, they would skillfully shape it by hand into the distinctive, pointed form we recognize from thousands of tomb paintings. This was not a hasty process. The consistency had to be just right, firm enough to hold its shape, yet soft enough to be molded without cracking. The resulting cone was a solid, pale object, deceptively simple in appearance but containing an entire world of scent waiting to be unlocked by warmth. But this leads to one of the most practical and fascinating questions about this ancient practice. How did a lump of scented fat stay securely perched on a person's head throughout hours of feasting, dancing, and conversation? The secret wasn't an adhesive or a pin. It was the incredible technology of the Egyptian wig. For the elite, wigs were far more than just fashion. They were sophisticated status symbols crafted from human hair, sheep's wool, or even date palm fibers, and were often layered and styled into elaborate, voluminous creations. These wigs were not tight-fitting caps but substantial headpieces with a broad, flat, and densely textured crown. This surface provided the perfect stable platform for the perfume cone. We can envision a servant or the individual themselves carefully pressing the base of the cone onto the wig, where the intricate mesh of fibers would grip the soft fat, anchoring it firmly in place. Once secured, the science of the cone would take over. The combined heat of the Egyptian sun and the wearer's own body temperature would begin a gradual, graceful transformation. The solid cone wouldn't drip or run in a messy way. Instead, it would soften and slowly liquefy from the bottom up, releasing a continuous, perfumed oil that would seep through the wig. This created a personal microclimate of fragrance, anointing the wearer's shoulders, clothing, and the immediate space around them with a cooling, scented sheen. This slow melting action was the entire point. It was a deliberate, timed release mechanism that turned the individual into a living source of perfume, ensuring they remained fragrant and ritually pure from the beginning of a ceremony until its very end. Now, let us step away from the workshop and into the world of its creation to witness the perfume cone in its natural habitat, a grand evening banquet at the estate of a high official. Our guide is a noblewoman, her status marked by the sheer whiteness of her linen gown and the intricate complexity of her layered wig. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, her attendant presents the cone. It is a pale, unadorned sculpture, cool and solid to the touch. With practiced hands, the attendant presses its broad base firmly into the dense, dark hair of the wig, where it sits like a small, fragrant mountain atop her head. At this moment, the cone is inert, a promise of what is to come. She joins the other guests, the air already buzzing with the sounds of lutes and chatter, the smoky aroma of roasting meats mingling with the scent of blooming night flowers. The ceremony of scent is about to begin. As the banquet progresses, a gentle but constant heat begins its transformative work. It comes from two sources, the radiant warmth of her own skin rising from her scalp and the ambient heat of the Egyptian night, still heavy from the day's sun. This energy is absorbed by the cone, triggering a slow, deliberate melt. The process is not a sudden liquefaction but a graceful surrender. The fats and waxes at the very bottom of the cone, those in direct contact with the warmth of the wig, are the first to soften, turning from a solid into a rich, fragrant oil. This oil then begins to seep, almost imperceptibly at first, into the fibers of the wig itself. The wig acts as a sophisticated wick, drawing the perfumed oil downward and outward, anointing every strand. Soon, glistening trails of scent become visible, tracing dark, shiny paths through the elaborate hairstyle, a visible testament to the luxury unfolding. This is where the master perfumer's blend reveals its genius. The first scent to greet the noblewoman and those near her is the top note, perhaps a fresh, green hint of papyrus or a bright spark of citrus from the frankincense. It's an immediate, uplifting burst that cuts through the other banquet smells, announcing her presence with clarity and vitality. As the cone continues to warm, the heart of the fragrance blooms. The intoxicating sweetness of the blue lotus infusion begins to dominate, wrapping her in a floral cloud that is both sensual and sacred. This is the main event, the scent that defines her throughout the hours of feasting and music. And all the while, the deep, resinous bass notes of myrrh and cedar provide a steady, grounding undertone, a whisper of eternity and the divine that will linger long into the night. The experience is profoundly multisensory and deeply symbolic. She feels a cool sensation as the oils evaporate from her skin, a natural air conditioning effect that is both physically refreshing and ritually purifying. With every slight turn of her head, she releases a new wave of fragrance, creating a personal aura of sanctity and pleasure. She is not merely wearing a perfume, she is participating in a sacred act. The melting cone mirrors the burning of incense in the temple, a sacrifice of precious substance to please the gods and maintain cosmic order. Each glistening drop that traces a path from the wig onto her shoulders is an anointing, a constant reaffirmation of her high status, her purity, and her harmony with the principles of Maat. By the time the last course is served and the stars are bright overhead, the cone has diminished, its purpose gloriously fulfilled. The noblewoman retires, her skin and clothing still imbued with the deep, lasting bass notes, a fragrant memory of the celebration that will accompany her even in sleep. This profound connection between fragrance and the divine brings us to the very heart of why the perfume cone was so indispensable. Its significance was rooted in one of the most fundamental concepts of ancient Egyptian belief, the principle of Maat. Maat was far more than just truth or justice. It was the cosmic order itself, the harmonious balance that held chaos and decay at bay. The gods themselves were believed to live in a state of perfect Maat, and for a human to approach them, whether in a temple, ritual, or in the afterlife, they too had to be in a state of ritual purity. And in the Egyptian worldview, what was pure was fragrant, and what was impure stank. Foul odors were associated with everything chaotic and evil, disease, decay, and the monstrous god of chaos, Set. To smell pleasant, therefore, was to be in a state of Maat. By wearing the perfume cone, an individual was actively maintaining this divine order on a personal level, creating a protective, holy aura around their body that made them acceptable to the gods. It was a form of non-verbal prayer, a constant olfactory declaration of one's alignment with cosmic harmony. This symbolic power was deeply embedded in the cone's very form. While it appears simple to us, its shape was likely rich with meaning. Some scholars suggest it represented the primordial mound, the Benben, the first piece of earth to emerge from the waters of chaos at the dawn of creation. By wearing this shape on their head, the pinnacle of the body, the wearer was symbolically reenacting the moment of creation, aligning themselves with the ultimate act of order triumphing over chaos. Others propose it mimicked an inverted lotus bud, the flower that emerged each morning from the watery depths, a potent symbol of rebirth and the sun god's daily renewal. As the cone melted, it could be seen as the lotus blooming, releasing its life-giving fragrance. This wasn't a static accessory. It was a dynamic symbol of creation and regeneration, its very transformation mirroring the cyclical nature of the universe they revered. We find clear evidence of this sacred function in the art created for eternity, the tomb walls. In numerous banquet scenes, the guests are depicted with these pale cones atop their wigs, but the context is crucial. These are not just parties, they are rituals often connected to festivals of the gods or to the funerary cult of the tomb owner. The scenes show the cone in action, with glistening trails of perfumed oil depicted as dark lines running down the sides of the wig, anointing the wearer. This visual language directly parallels scenes of gods anointing the pharaoh, or of priests anointing cult statues with sacred oils. The message is unmistakable: the wearer is being sanctified. Furthermore, in the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells designed to guide the deceased through the afterlife, we find explicit textual links. Spell 125, recited before the judgment of Osiris, includes the declaration, "I am pure," a statement intrinsically tied to the concept of ritual cleanliness, which was achieved through washing, wearing clean white linen, and being perfumed. The perfume cone was the ultimate guarantee of this purity, a portable source of sanctity that ensured the deceased would be found morally and ritually acceptable in the Hall of Judgment. Ultimately, the perfume cone served as a brilliant democratization of temple ritual. Inside the temple's Holy of Holies, only the high priest could perform the most sacred act, anointing the statue of the god with precious oils to awaken its spirit and make it a suitable vessel for the deity's presence. This act was the core of Egyptian state religion. The perfume cone allowed the elite to partake in a similar ritual on a personal scale. As the cone melted on their head, they were, in effect, anointing themselves, becoming their own sacred vessel, carrying a piece of the divine within their very person throughout their daily life and most important celebrations. It transformed a luxury item into a direct link to the gods, a wearable amulet of protection and piety that blurred the line between the secular and the sacred, making every moment a potential moment of communion. But this deep spiritual significance existed alongside a much more worldly reality. The perfume cone was also one of the most potent and visible status symbols in ancient Egyptian society, a silent but unmistakable declaration of wealth and privilege. Simply put, if you were wearing one, you had arrived. The very economics of its creation placed it firmly out of reach for the average farmer or laborer. Consider the ingredients. Myrrh and frankincense were not just pleasant smells. They were international commodities as valuable as gold, shipped across vast and dangerous trade routes. Beeswax, a superior base to common animal tallow, was a product of a specialized and respected industry. The amount of labor, skill, and sheer capital required to produce even a single high-quality cone made it an exclusive accessory. Wearing one was like wearing your bank statement on your head. Furthermore, the act of wearing the cone itself was a statement of leisure. Imagine trying to wear a slowly melting lump of perfumed fat while hauling stone for a pyramid, working in a field under the blazing sun, or even performing most domestic chores. It was utterly impractical. The cone was an accessory for stillness and celebration, for individuals whose lives were not defined by manual labor. Its presence signaled that the wearer had the freedom to attend lengthy banquets, religious ceremonies, and social gatherings, activities that were the hallmark of the elite. This is a universal language of luxury, the ability to engage in non-essential, beautiful, and often impractical pursuits. The specific scent a person chose to wear functioned as a sophisticated form of social coding, much like a designer logo or a particular brand of watch does today. A noblewoman anointed with a delicate, locally infused lotus scent might be signaling refined, traditional tastes, but a royal courtier whose cone released the sharp, unmistakable aroma of imported cedarwood from Lebanon was communicating something far more powerful. That scent was a direct olfactory resume. It said, "I have connections, I have access to trade networks that span the known world. My influence reaches beyond the borders of Egypt." Wearing cinnamon, a spice that journeyed from the distant lands of Sri Lanka or India, was the ancient equivalent of owning a hyper-exclusive, limited edition item. It was a statement of almost unimaginable wealth and global reach. Your personal fragrance became your signature, telling everyone in your vicinity not just who you were, but the extent of your power and your place in the intricate social hierarchy. We can draw a direct parallel to the modern luxury goods market. The ancient Egyptian perfume cone served the same social purpose as a bespoke fragrance from a Parisian perfumery or a piece of high-end jewelry. Today, wearing a famous designer scent can signal taste and disposable income, while owning a unique, custom-blended perfume speaks to a more rarefied, individualistic luxury. Similarly, the cone was the ancient world's ultimate designer accessory. Its value wasn't just in the materials, but in the artistry, the exclusivity, and the powerful statement it made about the wearer's identity. It was a wearable testament to one's success, a fragrant badge of honor that set the elite apart in a society where visual and olfactory cues were paramount to understanding social standing. So what was the ultimate result of this alchemical process? What did these legendary perfumes actually smell like as they melted under the Egyptian sun? While a time machine remains elusive, we are not entirely left in the dark. Modern science has given us remarkable clues. Archaeologists using techniques like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, have analyzed the microscopic residues left inside ancient Egyptian perfume jars and even the porous walls of the containers themselves. These scientific snapshots, combined with the detailed recipes we find in temple inscriptions, allow us to piece together a vivid olfactory portrait that is both familiar and strangely alien to our modern noses. If you were to catch a whiff of a noble's perfume cone at a Theban banquet, the first thing that would strike you is its profound complexity and boldness. This was not a subtle, single-note fragrance. It was a rich, layered symphony designed to project and to tell a story. The dominant character would have been deeply resinous and spicy. The scent of frankincense would have provided a bright, clean, almost lemony and peppery top note, while myrrh would have contributed a deeper, bittersweet and medicinal quality, reminiscent of old forests and sacred spaces. Interwoven with these would be the warm, sweet and woody embrace of cinnamon, a note of pure luxury that would have been instantly recognizable to anyone in the know. But it wouldn't have been all spice and resin. The sacred blue lotus would have infused the entire composition with a heavy, intoxicating floral sweetness, a narcotic honey-like aroma that balanced the sharper edges of the other ingredients. The overall effect would have been a scent that was warm, balsamic, and slightly sweet, with an incredible tenacity that clung to skin and fabric for hours. This ancient Egyptian perfume profile stands in stark contrast to many of the light, airy, and predominantly floral fragrances that dominate the modern market today. Our contemporary perfumes often aim for transparency and a quick, pleasant burst. The Egyptian ideal was the opposite: opacity, weight, and longevity. Theirs was a scent designed to transform the air around the wearer, to create a palpable aura. It was a bold statement, not a whispered secret. This difference highlights a fundamental shift in the purpose of perfume. For us, fragrance is often about personal enjoyment and casual attraction. For the Egyptians, it was about ritual purification, social signaling, and communication with the divine. A scent needed to be powerful enough to reach the nostrils of the gods and distinct enough to announce one's elevated status across a crowded room. The closest modern equivalent might not be a fine perfume, but the powerful, evocative scent of incense in a grand cathedral. A smell that doesn't just perfume the air but sanctifies it, creating an atmosphere that is felt as much as it is smelled. This profound connection between personal adornment and the afterlife brings us to one of the most vital functions of the perfume cone: its role as a permanent passport to eternity. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end but a transition to a new, everlasting life, and preparation for this journey was the single most important undertaking of one's earthly existence. Every object placed in a tomb, from the grandest golden mask to the simplest loaf of bread, was intended for use in the afterlife, and among these grave goods, the perfume cone held a place of exceptional importance. It wasn't merely a comforting luxury for the deceased. It was an absolute necessity for navigating the perilous journey through the underworld and standing pure before the gods. Archaeology provides us with tangible proof of this belief. While the fatty and waxy cones themselves were organic and often decomposed over millennia, they left behind unmistakable traces. In several elite tombs, excavators have discovered what are known as ceremonial wigs made of plaster or stucco. These were not meant to be worn in life but were created specifically for the tomb. And there, sculpted right onto the crown of these eternal wigs, we find the clear, three-dimensional form of a perfume cone. This was a permanent, unmelting version, a magical guarantee that the scent of sanctity would never fade, even after the real cone had been used up. In other instances, tomb paintings depict the deceased seated before an offering table heaped with goods, and among the piles of food and vessels, you can see spare perfume cones stacked neatly, a backup supply for eternity. Perhaps the most direct evidence comes from the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, the community of the artisans who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. In their more humble burials, archaeologists have found small, linen-wrapped packages placed near the head of the deceased. While the contents have often deteriorated, chemical analysis has sometimes revealed traces of fat and fragrant resins, the humble but heartfelt version of the elite perfume cone, proving that the desire for ritual purity in death transcended social class. The reason for this obsessive inclusion is etched into the very spells of the Book of the Dead. To achieve immortality, the soul of the deceased had to pass a final, terrifying test, the weighing of the heart ceremony. In this divine judgment, the heart of the dead person was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the symbol of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would outweigh the feather, and a monstrous creature would devour it, condemning the soul to non-existence. But if the heart was as light as the feather, the deceased would be declared true of voice and granted eternal life in the blissful field of reeds. To be true of voice meant to be morally justified, but it also carried a literal, ritual meaning, to be clean, pure, and pleasing to the gods. And in the Egyptian mind, nothing was more pleasing than the smell of sacred offerings. A funerary perfume cone was therefore a crucial piece of spiritual preparation. It ensured the deceased would arrive in the Hall of Judgment smelling not of the decay of the grave, but of myrrh, lotus, and frankincense, the very scents of the gods themselves. This fragrant purity was believed to influence the outcome of the trial, making the individual acceptable to Osiris and the 42 divine judges. The cone's purpose, however, extended beyond the moment of judgment. The afterlife was imagined as a perfect, idealized mirror of Egypt, a place where one would enjoy banquets, travel on divine boats, and be in the company of gods. Just as a perfume cone was essential for a celebratory banquet in life, it would be equally necessary for the eternal feasts in the field of reeds. By providing the deceased with an unending supply, the living were ensuring their loved one could participate fully in the joys of the afterlife, maintaining their high status and divine favor forever. The perfume cone, in the context of the tomb, becomes a beautiful and poignant symbol of the Egyptian worldview. It bridges the gap between life and death, the physical and the spiritual, the human and the divine. It was a final, fragrant gift from the living to the dead, an object of daily life transformed into a powerful tool for immortality, proving that for the ancient Egyptians, the path to eternity was a path one had to smell one's way through. Looking closely at these vivid banquet scenes, the placement of the perfume cone is never accidental. It is always positioned prominently atop the head, often depicted with dark, wavy lines streaming down the side of the wig. These lines are the artist's ingenious way of showing the cone in its active state, melting and anointing the wearer. This isn't a static portrait, it's a snapshot of a ritual in motion. The artists were capturing the very moment of transformation where the solid object becomes a liquid blessing. By choosing to illustrate this specific phase, they emphasized the cone's function. Its purpose was not just to be worn, but to be used to perform its sacred duty of releasing fragrance and sanctity. This visual cue transforms the two-dimensional painting into a dynamic record of an experience, inviting the viewer to imagine the scent and the cool, glistening sensation. It's a masterstroke of symbolic storytelling, where a simple artistic convention conveys a complex sensory and spiritual event. The sheer frequency of these images points to a deeper purpose beyond mere decoration. In the logic of Egyptian funerary art, everything painted or carved on the tomb walls was magically activated for the afterlife. The scenes of bountiful harvests, plentiful feasts, and musical entertainment were not just pleasant memories, they were divine guarantees. They were spells, in a sense, designed to ensure the tomb owner would enjoy these pleasures for eternity. Within this framework, the perfume cone becomes a crucial component of the ideal afterlife. Its constant presence in banquet scenes signals that a state of ritual purity, joyous celebration, and divine acceptance were non-negotiable requirements for eternal happiness. The tomb owner wasn't just hoping to attend parties forever. They were ensuring they would be worthy of them, perpetually pure and pleasing to the gods. The cone, therefore, is a symbol of qualified bliss. It represents the joy that comes from being in a state of grace. We can also interpret its prominence as a powerful status symbol meant to last forever. In life, wearing a cone declared your wealth and social standing. In death, having your likeness eternally adorned with one made a permanent claim to that elite identity. It told every spirit, god, and demon in the afterlife that this was a person of importance, someone who had lived righteously and possessed the means to secure a privileged existence beyond death. This was especially significant because these tombs were not entirely private. They were places where family members and priests would come to perform rituals, and the art served as a lasting public testament to the deceased's legacy. The perpetual perfume cone on the wall was a final, unshakable assertion of their noble character and their successful, fragrant life, a boast meant to echo through the centuries. Ultimately, the artistic depiction of the perfume cone is the key that unlocks its true meaning. It was the Egyptians' own visual answer to the question of its purpose. In their art, they show us that the cone was the essential ingredient for transforming an ordinary gathering into a sacred celebration, and a mortal life into an immortal one. It is the symbol of life at its most perfect, fragrant, joyful, and in perfect harmony with the divine. When we look at these images, we are not just seeing a strange headpiece, we are seeing the ancient Egyptian vision of heaven itself, a world forever scented with the aroma of eternity. This brings us to a crucial point that often gets lost in translation across the centuries, a modern misconception that can completely reshape our understanding of the entire experience. Many of us, looking at those stylized tomb paintings, imagine the perfume cone as a single, rigid object, a sort of decorative candle perched precariously on the head that somehow defied gravity and heat all night. But the truth is far more dynamic and intentional. The melting was not a design flaw or an uncomfortable side effect. It was the entire purpose. The cone was engineered to transform, and that very transformation was the source of its power. The beautiful, glistening trails of oil making their way down the elaborate wigs were not a messy accident. They were a central part of the aesthetic, a visible sign that the ritual was working. It was a performance of luxury where the gradual dissolution of the object was the main event. A particularly persistent myth suggests that these cones were made of a wax that would drip uncomfortably down the wearer's face and neck, creating a sticky, unpleasant mess. This image likely comes from our own modern experiences with cheap candles, but it completely misunderstands the sophisticated material science of the Egyptian perfumer. The base was not a simple, low-melting paraffin wax. As we've explored, it was a carefully calibrated blend, often incorporating beeswax for its higher melting point and tallow that had been meticulously rendered to be odorless and stable. The goal was never a rapid, watery drip. The consistency they aimed for was more akin to a rich, solid balm or a dense pomade. When warmed by body heat, it would soften into a luxurious oil, not a runny liquid. It would seep, not drip. The dense, fibrous texture of the wigs acted as a perfect buffer, absorbing the oil and controlling its release down the hair strands and onto the shoulders, much like a wick draws oil in a lamp. This created a cooling, anointing sensation, not a sticky one. The experience was designed to be elegant and refreshing, a welcome relief under the Egyptian sun, not an ordeal to be endured. So, what was the practical reality for the person wearing it? Imagine the sensation not as a drip, but as a gradual, luxurious release. Throughout the evening, the wearer would be aware of a gentle, cooling evaporation as the scented oils met the air, a natural form of air conditioning. They would feel the increasing weight of their wig as it became saturated with the fragrant blend, a constant, pleasant reminder of the luxury they embodied. The primary visual wasn't of streams running down faces, but of dark, shiny paths tracing through the complex layers of the hairstyle, a glistening accent that caught the flickering torchlight. It was a beauty product, yes, but its beauty was active and participatory. The cone's purpose was to integrate seamlessly with the body, to become a part of the wearer's presence in the most literal way. It was a testament to an ancient beauty standard that valued process and transformation over static perfection. The ideal was not to remain untouched and pristine, but to be visibly and olfactorily engaged in the sacred act of becoming one with the fragrance. This practical reality underscores the incredible ingenuity behind what might seem like a simple accessory, revealing a civilization that mastered the art of blending form, function, and profound symbolic meaning into a single, melting masterpiece. So how can we be so confident about these detailed recipes and their profound significance? Our understanding doesn't just come from interpreting ancient art. It's grounded in the hard, tangible evidence unearthed by archaeologists and deciphered by cutting-edge science. While the perfume cones themselves, being made of organic fats and waxes, have almost entirely decomposed over the millennia, they have left behind subtle but unmistakable chemical fingerprints. The most powerful tool in our modern investigative arsenal is a technique called gas chromatography mass spectrometry. This process allows scientists to analyze the microscopic residues trapped in the porous clay of ancient perfume jars and even in the soil surrounding burials. By vaporizing these tiny samples, the machine can separate and identify each individual chemical compound present, creating a precise molecular profile of what the vessel once held. It's like giving us the ability to smell the last drops of a fragrance that evaporated 3,000 years ago. Through this method, we have confirmed the presence of frankincense in jars from the workshop of a queen, detected the distinct signature of pine resin in a noble's tomb, and found evidence of Belano's oil, a prized base oil pressed from the nuts of the balanite tree, in numerous containers. This isn't guesswork, it's direct chemical testimony from the past. Perhaps the most compelling physical evidence comes from discoveries within the tombs themselves. In the burial of a woman named Henatoi, a chantress of the god Ammon who lived during the 21st dynasty, excavators found something extraordinary. Placed near her head was a small, linen-wrapped package. When carefully unwrapped, it revealed a lump of solid, whitish fat. This wasn't just any fat. Chemical analysis later confirmed it was a solidified unguent, a perfumed salve, and within its matrix were traces of conifer resin, likely from a pine or fir tree. This humble lump is arguably the closest we have ever come to holding an actual ancient Egyptian perfume cone in our hands. It was her personal supply for the afterlife, a direct link between the elaborate banquet scenes painted on her tomb walls and the physical reality of her beliefs. Similarly, in the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, the final resting places of the artisans who built the royal tombs have yielded similar, though more modest, packages. These finds are incredibly significant because they demonstrate that the practice of being buried with perfumed unguents was not limited to the super elite. It was a deeply held aspiration across different levels of society. Everyone, from the pharaoh to the skilled stone carver, hoped to enter the afterlife pure and fragrant. We can also look to the evidence from temple laboratories where the most sacred scents were blended. The walls of the Edfu and Dendera temples preserve actual recipes for making kai-fi, the legendary incense used in ceremonies. These are not vague descriptions, they are precise, step-by-step instructions, sometimes listing 16 or more ingredients and specifying the exact order of mixing, the time of day for preparation, and the accompanying prayers to be recited. While these recipes are for incense burned as an offering, the ingredients frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, honey, wine, and raisins overlap significantly with what we believe was used in personal perfumery. This sacred context confirms the spiritual importance of these aromatics and gives us a reliable framework for understanding the broader perfumer's craft. The temple texts show us that scent creation was a precise, ritualized science governed by tradition and religious belief, which lends immense credibility to our interpretations of the more personal use of perfume cones. By combining the molecular evidence from residue analysis with the physical discovery of actual perfumed substances in tombs and the detailed written records from temples, we build an irrefutable case. This multi-pronged scientific approach allows us to move beyond speculation and state with confidence that the ancient Egyptians were master perfumers, whose sophisticated creations were an essential thread in the fabric of their daily life and their journey to eternity. This specialized knowledge of blending sacred resins and delicate florals was not something every Egyptian possessed. It resided with a distinct class of highly skilled artisans, the ancient perfumers, who were more than simple merchants. They were master craftsmen, and in many cases their work was so vital to the state religion and elite society that they likely operated under direct royal or temple patronage. Imagine the prestige of being the official perfumer to the pharaoh's court, responsible for creating the scents that would anoint the royal family and sanctify the most important ceremonies. This patronage would have granted them unparalleled access to the rarest ingredients arriving from the furthest corners of the empire, from the first bales of frankincense off a ship from Punt to the precious cinnamon bark carried by desert caravans. A day in the life of such a master would have been a symphony of sensory evaluation and precise, methodical work. His morning might begin not in the workshop, but at the docks or the royal warehouses, personally inspecting new shipments of resins. He would rub a tear of frankincense between his fingers to warm it, then bring it to his nose, judging its quality by the clarity of its citrus pepper scent. He would taste a tiny fragment of myrrh to assess its bitterness, a sign of its potency. Back in his workshop, a space that was part apothecary, part chemical laboratory, and part artist studio, the real work would commence. The air would be thick with a layered, complex aroma, the sharpness of fresh-cut cedar wood, the honeyed sweetness of beeswax warming over a low fire, the narcotic bloom of lotus petals steeping in oil. The tools of his trade would be arranged with meticulous care. Grinding stones of varying coarseness waited to pulverize hardened resins into a fine powder, increasing their surface area for better infusion. A variety of heating vessels, from simple clay pots to elegant bronze bowls set over sand baths for gentle, controlled warmth, stood ready. Most fascinating would be the shelves lined with hundreds of containers, alabaster jars that kept oils cool, labeled pottery amphorae for bulk ingredients, and small, elegant vials of faience and glass for the finished masterpieces. Each jar might bear a hieratic label noting its contents and the date of its infusion. In this organized chaos, the perfumer was both scientist and artist. He would experiment with new blends, adding a little more cypress grass for a green, earthy note or a touch of labdanum for a leathery, profound depth. He would keep detailed mental or perhaps even written records of his formulations, understanding that a fraction more of one ingredient could elevate a fragrance from pleasant to transcendent. His reputation, and indeed his life's work, depended on this relentless pursuit of olfactory perfection, turning his workshop into a true laboratory where the very essence of the world was captured, studied, and transformed into liquid divinity. Indeed, that small, solid object resting on an Egyptian noble's head was far more than a personal luxury. It was a miniature globe, a physical representation of an empire's astonishing reach. To understand the true weight of a perfume cone, we must trace the incredible journeys of its ingredients back to their sources, voyages that stretched across thousands of miles of desert, sea, and diplomatic intrigue. The myrrh and frankincense that formed the heart of the most coveted blends did not grow along the fertile banks of the Nile. These precious resins came from a land that bordered on the mythical for the Egyptians, the land of Punt. Modern scholars generally place Punt in the region encompassing modern-day Eritrea, Djibouti, and northern Somalia. This was a treacherous journey requiring a months-long sea voyage down the Red Sea, navigating unpredictable winds and currents. A successful return from Punt was such a monumental achievement that Pharaoh Hatshep, Sut had the entire expedition gloriously depicted on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. The scenes show Egyptian ships loaded with living myrrh trees, sacks of aromatic resin, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals, all presented as tributes to the god Ammon. This wasn't just a trading mission, it was a state-sponsored endeavor that blurred the lines between commerce, exploration, and divine mandate. The myrrh and frankincense obtained were not merely commodities, they were prizes that demonstrated the pharaoh's ability to harness the winds and seas to bring the world's wonders home. Another crucial component, cedar wood and its essential oil, pointed north and east toward the legendary forests of Lebanon. The famed cedars of Lebanon were a symbol of strength and eternity, their wood essential for building the sacred barks that carried statues of the gods and for crafting the finest coffins for the elite. But securing this resource required a different kind of power, diplomatic and military muscle. Unlike the sea voyage to Punt, the route to Lebanon was overland, crossing the Sinai Peninsula and moving up the coast through territories often controlled by rival powers or independent city-states. Egyptian pharaohs frequently mounted military campaigns into the Levant not only to assert dominance but also to secure access to these vital trade goods. They would negotiate treaties, offer Egyptian gold and grain in exchange, or simply demand timber as tribute from subdued local rulers. A single log of Lebanese cedar was a valuable asset. The oil extracted from it, which carried the tree's sharp, clean, and enduring scent, was exponentially more so. To have a perfume cone infused with cedar oil was to wear the scent of Egyptian geopolitical strength, a fragrant reminder that the pharaoh's influence extended from the deserts of the south to the forests of the north. Perhaps the most telling ingredient, however, is one that seems almost impossibly out of place: cinnamon. This spice is native to Sri Lanka and parts of India, a distance that dwarfs even the journey to Punt. There is no evidence of direct trade between Egypt and the Indian subcontinent at the height of the perfume cone's popularity. So how did cinnamon end up in the possession of Egyptian perfumers? The answer reveals the existence of complex, multi-stage trade networks that functioned like a relay race of commerce. Cinnamon likely passed through countless hands along the incense route, moving from Southeast Asia to India, then across the Arabian Sea to the southern coast of Arabia. From there, Arab traders would have carried it north to trading hubs where Egyptian merchants could acquire it. Each transfer along this chain would have inflated the price exponentially. By the time a small amount of cinnamon bark reached Thebes, its value would have been comparable to gold. Therefore, a perfume cone scented with cinnamon was the ultimate flex. It was a silent, aromatic declaration that the wearer possessed wealth so vast it could command goods from the very edge of the known world, procured through trade networks so sophisticated and far-flung that they were almost magical. This global procurement system transformed the perfumer's workshop into a sensory United Nations. The air would have been thick with the story of empire, the lemony brightness of frankincense from Punt, the medicinal depth of myrrh from the same region, the balsamic strength of cedar from Lebanon, and the warm, exotic sweetness of cinnamon from distant lands beyond the horizon. The act of blending these scents was, in a way, an act of geopolitical synthesis, bringing the world's most desired aromatics into a single, harmonious expression of Egyptian power. The noble or royal courtier who wore this blend was making a profound statement. They were announcing that their identity was not just local or national, but international. They were citizens of a superpower connected to a global economy of prestige. In a world without maps, the melting cone on their head was a wearable atlas. It sent a daily reminder that Egypt was the central hub in a web of trade and diplomacy that spanned continents. It was the ultimate status symbol, proving that true luxury has always been, and will always be, a story of connection. Yet the influence of this remarkable invention did not end at the borders of Egypt or with the closing of its tombs. The sophisticated art of the Egyptian perfumer, a craft refined over millennia, began to ripple outward, carried by trade and conquest to shape the very foundations of Western perfumery. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in the 4th century before the Common Era, he and his successors, the Ptolemaic rulers, did not simply impose Greek culture. They became enthralled by the depth of Egyptian knowledge, particularly in the realm of scent. The great city of Alexandria, founded at the mouth of the Nile, became a vibrant melting pot and a new epicenter for the perfume trade, where Greek scientific inquiry met Egyptian practical mastery. It was here that the methods of enfleurage and maceration, perfected for capturing the soul of the blue lotus, were eagerly studied and adopted. Greek perfumers who had previously favored simpler oil-based infusions began to experiment with these more complex techniques, incorporating the rich, resinous palette of frankincense and myrrh that had been the hallmark of Egyptian luxury. The Greek philosopher Theophrastus, often called the father of botany, wrote extensively about perfumes in the 3rd century BCE, detailing recipes that clearly show this Egyptian influence, describing the use of myrrh and cinnamon in ways that would have been familiar to a perfumer in Thebes. This fusion of knowledge then flowed directly into the heart of the Roman Empire. For the Romans, who embraced excess and sensory indulgence on an unprecedented scale, perfume became an obsession. They saw scent not just as a marker of status or a religious tool, but as an essential component of the luxurious lifestyle, and the blueprint for their most prized unguents came from Egypt. The Roman passion for solid perfumes is a direct continuation of the perfume cone's legacy. While the conical shape itself fell out of fashion, the principle of a solid, melting unguent remained. Wealthy Romans would use these solid perfumes to anoint their bodies after bathing, and they stored them in elaborate boxes called pyxides, often made of alabaster or glass, materials chosen specifically to keep the precious fat-based concoctions cool and stable. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, expresses both awe and moral disdain for the vast sums spent on these imported fragrances, noting ingredients like myrrh and cassia that were shipped from the East through Egyptian trade networks. The very routes that had once supplied the pharaohs now fed the insatiable demand of the Roman elite, proving that the economic and cultural pathways carved by Egypt had become the arteries of a new, interconnected world. Perhaps the most profound export was not a technique, but an idea, the concept that fragrance could be a bridge between the earthly and the divine. The Egyptian belief that pleasing odors were synonymous with holiness was absorbed into the religious practices of Greece and Rome. In Greek temples, the burning of kyphi-like incense blends became a standard part of worship, a direct parallel to the rituals in the temples of Ammon. The Romans took this a step further, using vast quantities of perfume in public ceremonies and funerary rites, believing the smoke carried their prayers to the heavens. This spiritual connection to scent was then inherited by the early Christian Church, which adopted the use of frankincense and myrrh in its liturgy, forever embedding these ancient Egyptian aromatics into the sacred traditions of the West. The perfumer's workshop, once a feature of Egyptian palace and temple complexes, evolved into a fixture of Roman towns and later of medieval monasteries in Europe, where monks preserved the art of blending aromatics for both medicine and worship. So the next time you spritz on a modern perfume, consider the incredible journey of the craft itself. The complex floral extracts made possible by enfleurage, the deep woody notes achieved through patient maceration, even the very notion that a fragrance can be an intimate, personal expression of identity. All of these concepts have a lineage that can be traced back to the banks of the Nile. The Egyptian perfume cone was not an isolated curiosity. It was a pioneering innovation that demonstrated the power of scent to encapsulate culture, spirituality, and artistry. It taught the world that a fragrance could be more than a mere pleasant smell. It could be a story, a status symbol, and a prayer, all contained within a single melting masterpiece. The legacy of those glistening cones on the wigs of long-ago nobles is still present, an invisible thread of scent connecting our modern world to the profound and beautiful imagination of ancient Egypt. So, after exploring this world of ancient artistry, you might be wondering if it's possible to bring a piece of that history to life in your own home. The answer is a resounding yes. While we can't source authentic Balanos oil or sacred blue lotus absolute with ease, we can use historical research as our guide to create a safe, modern approximation that captures the spirit of the ancient Egyptian perfume cone. The goal here isn't a perfect historical replica, but a tangible connection to the craft, allowing you to experience the same basic principles of blending and slow-release fragrance that delighted the nobles of Thebes. To begin, we need a stable base. Following the Egyptian principle of using a solid that melts at skin temperature, a blend of beeswax and a plant-based oil is an excellent and accessible choice. Beeswax provides the structure and higher melting point, just as it did for the elite, while a neutral, solid at room temperature oil like coconut or shea butter adds pliability and helps control the melt rate. For a basic recipe, you might start with a ratio of 1 part beeswax to 1 part coconut oil, gently melting these together in a heat-proof bowl set over a pot of simmering water. A modern double boiler recreates the careful, low-heat process of the ancient workshop. The key is patience. Just like the Egyptian perfumer, you want to avoid high heat that could scorch the ingredients and alter their subtle scents. Now for the most exciting part, the fragrance. This is where we bridge 3,000 years. To mimic the sacred aromas of ancient Egypt, we can turn to high-quality essential oils that echo the core ingredients. Frankincense essential oil offers that bright, clean, slightly citrusy and woody aroma that was so central to temple rituals. Myrrh essential oil provides the deep, bittersweet, resinous base note that adds gravity and longevity. For the floral heart, capturing the exact scent of the blue lotus is challenging, but a blend of floral oils can evoke its spirit. Consider using a little jasmine absolute for its rich, intoxicating floralcy, or perhaps neroli oil from orange blossoms for a sweeter, honeyed character. Sandalwood essential oil is a wonderful substitute for the prized cedar, offering a warm, woody, and balsamic dry down that is incredibly tenacious. The blending itself is the true alchemy. Once your beeswax and oil base is fully melted and combined, remove it from the heat and allow it to cool slightly. This is crucial, as adding essential oils to a very hot base can cause their delicate top notes to evaporate too quickly. Then begin your composition. Start with the base notes, add several drops of myrrh and sandalwood, stirring gently. Then introduce your middle notes like the frankincense and your chosen floral. Finally, if you wish, a single drop of a spice oil like cinnamon or cardamom can add a surprising top note, but use these potent oils very sparingly. As you stir, you are performing the same act as the ancient masters, deciding the character of your creation. Pour the fragrant liquid into a small mold. A silicone muffin cup or even a shot glass works perfectly, and let it cool completely until solid. To wear your creation, you can simply press a small piece against the inside of your wrist. Your body heat will warm it, releasing the fragrance in a gradual, personal cloud, allowing you to experience firsthand the ingenious, time-released luxury that defined an era. Indeed, the fundamental human impulse to adorn the head with fragrance proved to be a truly universal concept, one that transcended the sands of Egypt and blossomed in remarkable ways across different cultures and centuries. While the iconic conical shape may be uniquely Egyptian, the practice of using scented headwear as a tool for cooling, purification, and status displays a fascinating pattern of parallel invention. Consider, for instance, the traditions of the ancient Mediterranean world that followed Egypt's Golden Age. In Greece, particularly during the Hellenistic period after Alexander's conquests had fused cultures, we see evidence of scented wreaths and fillets. Guests at symposia, the famous drinking parties, would often wear wreaths made of flowers like roses, violets, and myrtle, which were not merely decorative. As the evening wore on and the room grew warm, the body heat would cause the petals and leaves to release their natural oils, creating a personal, fragrant aura around each reveler. This served a very similar function to the Egyptian cone. It was a social marker of participation in a privileged gathering and a practical way to stay pleasantly scented in a crowded space, a direct echo of the sensory logic developed along the Nile. This idea traveled west with the expanding Roman Empire, where it was embraced and transformed with characteristic Roman extravagance. Roman nobility, especially women, took the concept of scented adornment to new heights. They developed incredibly elaborate wigs, much like the Egyptians, but often made from the hair of slaves captured from Germanic tribes, prized for its light color. These wigs were not just platforms for scent, but were often perfumed directly. Historical accounts describe them being powdered with gold dust and infused with rich, spicy fragrances like spikenard and cassia. The Roman poet Ovid even offers advice in his works on the art of love, suggesting that a woman's hair should always smell pleasant. While the solid cone itself was not adopted, the principle of turning the head into a focal point of fragrance was absolutely central to Roman notions of beauty and luxury. The progression is clear, from the melting cone of Egypt to the floral wreaths of Greece and finally to the directly perfumed wigs of Rome. We see a continuous thread of using the head as the primary stage for a scented performance. Venturing beyond the classical world, we find equally compelling examples that highlight a shared human intuition. In the Indian subcontinent for thousands of years, a central part of Ayurvedic medicine and daily hygiene has been the practice of champa or fragrant hair oils. While not a solid object, the ritual shares the same core objective. Individuals would massage warmed oils infused with flowers like jasmine and champaka, herbs like brahmi and bringraj, and spices into the scalp and hair. This served a triple purpose. It was therapeutic for hair health, cooled the body in the intense heat, and released a continuous, subtle fragrance throughout the day as the warmth of the sun and body activated the scents. Similarly, in the Arab world, the use of attar, concentrated perfume oils, often involved applying them to the beard and the hair. The heat of the body would act as a diffuser, ensuring the wearer moved in a cloud of rose, oud, or amber, a practice deeply connected to Islamic traditions of cleanliness and presenting one's best self. These traditions, though distinct in form, all recognize the head as a primary source of body heat and a powerful vehicle for disseminating personal scent. Perhaps one of the most striking and direct parallels can be found much later in history, in the courts of 17th and 18th century Europe. This was the era of the peruke, or the powdered wig, an accessory that became synonymous with aristocracy and wealth. And just like the ancient Egyptian wig, it was far more than a fashion statement. It was a sophisticated scent delivery system. These wigs were immense, heavy, and notoriously difficult to maintain. To keep them looking fresh white and to mask any unpleasant odors in an age before frequent bathing, they were liberally powdered. But this wasn't just any powder. It was often scented with lavender, iris root, or orange blossom. The powder would settle into the dense curls, and throughout the day, the wearer's body heat would gently warm it, releasing a subtle, powdery fragrance. In the crowded, stuffy ballrooms and court chambers of Versailles, this created a personal bubble of pleasant aroma, a clear functional descendant of the Egyptian perfume cone. The European courtier, like the Egyptian noble, used their elaborate headpiece as a means of olfactory distinction, proving that the desire to signal status and purity through scented head wear is a theme that recurs across millennia and continents. This journey from the Nile to Versailles reveals a profound truth about our relationship with scent. It seems that across vast stretches of time and geography, humanity has independently arrived at the same conclusion: the head is the ideal canvas for fragrance. It is our crowning point, the highest and most visible part of our body, and a natural source of warmth that can activate and release a scent slowly throughout the day. Whether it was the fat and resin cone of Egypt, the floral wreath of Greece, the oiled hair of India, or the powdered wig of France, each culture developed its own solution to the same set of desires. The desire to feel cool and refreshed, to project an image of cleanliness and sanctity, and to announce one's social standing in a silent but unmistakable language of aroma. The story of the perfume cone, therefore, is not an isolated chapter in history. It is the beginning of a much longer, ongoing story of human ingenuity, a testament to our universal and enduring impulse to fuse art, science, and spirituality into the very way we present ourselves to the world. The humble perfume cone serves as a powerful keyhole, allowing us to peer directly into the ancient Egyptian soul. It reveals a civilization that did not draw a hard line between the physical and the spiritual, but instead saw the senses as a sacred pathway to the divine. For us in the modern world, we often compartmentalize our experiences. Religion is one thing, personal grooming is another, and social status is something else entirely. But for the Egyptians, these concepts were woven together into a single, seamless tapestry of existence, and the perfume cone was a vibrant thread running through it all. This small object demonstrates that they lived in a deeply sensual world, where a pleasing aroma was not just a fleeting pleasure but a fundamental aspect of living in harmony with the cosmos. The cone's very existence argues that to be human was to engage fully with the world through smell, sight, and touch, and that this engagement was a form of worship. This philosophy is most evident in how they connected personal adornment with cosmic principles. We've discussed the concept of Maat, the divine order. But the perfume cone shows us that Maat wasn't an abstract idea to be contemplated in a temple alone. It was a state of being that had to be actively cultivated in every moment. By consciously creating a pleasant sensory environment around themselves, the elite were participating in the maintenance of universal balance. They believed that chaos and evil were associated with stench and decay, while order and goodness were fragrant. Therefore, the act of smelling good was an active, moral endeavor. It was a way of pushing back against the entropy of the world, a daily reaffirmation of one's alignment with the forces of creation and light. The cone transforms a simple act of hygiene into a profound philosophical statement that individual choices about personal presentation have cosmic consequences. Furthermore, the cone illuminates the Egyptian approach to time and transformation. We live in a culture often focused on permanence and stasis. We want our possessions to last, and we value things that resist change. The ancient Egyptians, particularly in their religious beliefs, had a cyclical view of existence that celebrated transformation. The sun died each night and was reborn each morning. The Nile flooded and receded, bringing life from apparent destruction. The perfume cone embodies this principle perfectly. Its entire purpose was to change, to metamorphose from a solid, static object into a liquid, dynamic blessing. Its beauty was not in its fixed form, but in its graceful surrender to the elements, the heat of the body and the sun. This teaches us that they saw transformation not as loss, but as the fulfillment of an object's purpose. The melting was the point. It was a miniature, wearable drama of death and rebirth, echoing the central cycles of their universe right there on top of their heads. We can also see their sophisticated understanding of the self as a composite being. An Egyptian person was not just a body, they were a combination of physical form and spiritual elements like the ka and the ba. The tomb and its goods were provided to sustain all these aspects after death. The perfume cone, therefore, wasn't meant solely for the body. Its fragrance was nourishment for the ka, the life force, and a guiding beacon for the ba, the mobile spirit. This reveals a mindset that saw a person as a multi-layered entity, each layer requiring care and sustenance. The cone was a tool for maintaining the integrity of the whole self in life and especially for the journey beyond. It shows a profound investment in the complete well-being of the individual, addressing needs that were simultaneously physical, social, and spiritual in a single, elegant solution. Ultimately, the perfume cone challenges our modern distinctions between luxury and necessity, between the sacred and the profane. We might look at it and classify it as a non-essential item, a luxury of the elite. But for the ancient Egyptians, the cone's functions, purification, sanctification, social signaling were absolutely necessary for navigating both the complexities of society and the perils of the afterlife. What we see as a vanity item, they saw as a vital tool for existence. It forces us to reconsider our own categories. What objects in our own lives serve multiple, deep purposes that we take for granted? The perfume cone stands as a beautiful, fragrant testament to a culture that embraced the richness of sensory experience, saw the material world as imbued with spiritual significance, and understood that the path to eternity was a journey best taken smelling of lotus and myrrh. It's a lesson in living a fully integrated life where every sense is honored as a gateway to something greater. Even with the wealth of knowledge we've uncovered, the story of the Egyptian perfume cone is far from complete. Lingering questions create an enticing aura of mystery, reminding us that for every answer archaeology provides, new puzzles emerge. Consider the fascinating possibility of regional variations. We know Egypt was a long, narrow kingdom with distinct cultural centers: Thebes in the south, Memphis in the north, and bustling trade hubs like Alexandria in the later periods. Did the perfumers of Thebes, with their deep connection to the cult of Ammon, favor richer, more resinous blends for religious ceremonies, while the cosmopolitan artisans of the Delta might have experimented with lighter, fruitier scents influenced by Mediterranean trade? The chemical analysis of residue from jars found in different regions could one day reveal a map of ancient Egyptian scent preferences, showing us that there wasn't just one Egyptian perfume, but a diverse olfactory landscape as varied as the country itself. The question of storage and packaging is another tantalizing mystery. We've found the jars that held the liquid perfumed oils, but what about the solid cones themselves? How did a noblewoman transport them to a banquet without them melting or getting damaged? It's likely they were stored in individual, small containers made of materials that stayed cool. Imagine a delicate box carved from alabaster, a stone prized for its natural cooling properties, or a shallow dish of faience with a fitted lid. Perhaps they were even wrapped in a special linen cloth infused with a preservative herb like mint, to be unwrapped just before the ceremony. The discovery of such a container with the faint chemical ghost of a cone still inside would be a monumental find, giving us a complete picture of the object from workshop to wig. Perhaps the most intriguing unanswered question is whether there was a specific fragrance for every occasion, much like we have different perfumes for day and night or for work and a special event. It stretches the imagination to think the same conical object would be worn for a somber religious rite, a joyful wedding celebration, and a funerary procession. Logic suggests the scent profile would have been carefully chosen to match the spiritual and social tone. A cone for a festival of the goddess Hathor, associated with love and music, might have been bursting with the intoxicating sweetness of lily and mandrake. In contrast, a cone worn during a ritual for Osiris, god of the afterlife, would likely have been dominated by the solemn, purifying scents of myrrh and cedar. The cone itself was the vehicle, but the fragrance was the message. Ongoing research using ever more sensitive chemical analysis techniques on residue from different types of tombs, those of priests, royalty, and military officials, may one day allow us to distinguish a warrior's scent from a priest's blessing, adding a deeply personal dimension to our understanding of these individuals. The work of Egyptologists and archaeologists continues to chip away at these mysteries. New excavations, particularly in lesser-studied sites like provincial capitals or the settlements of the middle class, promised to reveal a more democratic version of the story, showing how the desire for fragrant purity trickled down through society. Each new tomb discovery, each fresh analysis of a pottery shard, brings us closer to hearing the whispered secrets of the perfumers themselves. The investigation into the perfume cone is a brilliant example of how history is not a static record but a living dialogue with the past, where every answered question simply leads to a more fascinating one, ensuring that the allure of ancient Egypt will never fade. And so we find ourselves at the close of our exploration with the full picture of this remarkable artifact now in view. It strikes you, doesn't it, just how much meaning was packed into that simple, pale cone. On the surface, it was a straightforward concept, a solid piece of perfumed material that would melt, but to see it only as such is to miss the entire point. The perfume cone was in reality a masterclass in integrated design, a perfect fusion of practical science, artistic expression, and spiritual belief that could only have emerged from a civilization as advanced and holistic as ancient Egypt. It was a microcosm of their entire world, a wearable universe. Consider first the sheer chemical ingenuity it demanded. This wasn't a matter of simply mixing a few pleasant smells. The Egyptian perfumers were, in effect, early materials scientists. They had to possess a deep, intuitive understanding of the physical properties of the substances they worked with. They knew that tallow, when rendered with painstaking care, could provide a stable, neutral base. They discovered that beeswax, with its higher melting point, offered greater resilience under the hot sun. They experimented with the precise ratios of fats, waxes, and oils to engineer a substance with the perfect melting profile, solid enough to be molded and worn, yet soft enough to yield gracefully to body heat. This was a sophisticated control of phase change, a deliberate manipulation of matter to achieve a specific, timed effect. The cone itself was the delivery mechanism, a slow-release device as clever as any modern piece of technology. Then we must acknowledge the cone as a powerful symbol of Egypt's place in the world. Resting on the head of a single noble, it was a physical map of an empire's reach. Each ingredient told a story of incredible journeys. The myrrh and frankincense whispered of perilous sea voyages to the fabled land of Punt. The cedar oil spoke of overland trade routes to the forests of Lebanon, secured by diplomacy and military might. The rare hint of cinnamon was nothing less than a scent of the impossible, a fragrant echo of trade networks so vast they stretched to the distant shores of India. To wear the cone was to wear the evidence of Egypt's economic and cultural power. It declared that the wearer was a citizen of a superpower, a central hub in a global exchange of luxury and knowledge. The entire known world was distilled into that fragrant lump, making the wearer a walking testament to their civilization's connections. Most profoundly, the cone reveals the Egyptian understanding of the human person as an inseparable blend of the physical and the spiritual. In our modern world, we often compartmentalize these aspects, but for them, the body was the vessel for the soul, and caring for one was honoring the other. The cone served the body in a beautifully practical way, cooling the skin, masking odors, providing a refreshing sensation. But it simultaneously served the spirit by creating an aura of ritual purity, aligning the wearer with the divine order of man. The very act of melting was sacred, a personal, miniature reenactment of the temple ritual where priests anointed statues of the gods. It transformed a social event into a ceremony and the individual into a sanctified being worthy of divine attention. This artifact, therefore, challenges our own distinctions between the mundane and the holy, showing us a culture that saw every aspect of daily life as an opportunity for spiritual connection. In the end, the legacy of the perfume cone is its stunning demonstration of how a society can embed its deepest values into the objects of everyday life. It was more than an accessory, it was a philosophy you could wear. It connected the chemistry of the workshop to the caravans on the trade routes and the body of the noble to the gods in the heavens. It reminds us that the most enduring human innovations are those that satisfy not just a single need, but the whole self, the physical, the social, and the spiritual all at once. The ancient Egyptians may be gone, but through the silent, fragrant testimony of the perfume cone, they continue to teach us a powerful lesson about the art of living an integrated, meaningful, and beautifully scented life. So the next time an ancient Egyptian mural catches your eye, and you see that pale cone perched atop a noble's head, you're no longer looking at a bizarre fashion choice or a simple lump of scented fat. You're witnessing the pinnacle of an entire civilization's ingenuity. That small, unassuming object represents a breathtaking convergence of disciplines. It's a landmark of ancient chemical engineering, where masters manipulated the very properties of wax and oil to invent a slow-release delivery system thousands of years ahead of its time. It's a profound theological statement, a wearable prayer that connected the wearer directly to the gods through the sacred language of scent. And it's an unmistakable symbol of global power, a fragrant map of trade routes that stretched from the heart of Africa to the distant shores of the Mediterranean and beyond. This was a culture that saw no separation between the practical and the spiritual, the artistic and the scientific, and the perfume cone is perhaps the most elegant expression of that unified worldview. We've traveled together from the bustling workshops along the Nile to the grandest banquets in Thebes, unraveling the step-by-step process of how these fragrant cones were conceived, crafted, and finally worn. We've seen how common animal fat was transformed through painstaking rendering into a pure, neutral base, and how the elite demanded exotic bases like beeswax and cedar resin for their superior qualities. We've explored the global bazaar of aromatics that filled the perfumer's jars, the sacred lotus of the Nile, the legendary frankincense and myrrh from Punt, the prized cedar from Lebanon, and the impossibly rare cinnamon from the edges of the known world. We've decoded the alchemical techniques of enfleurage and maceration, where patience and heat coaxed the very soul from flowers and resins, and we've finally understood the beautiful, intentional mechanics of its use, how it was anchored on an elaborate wig, and how body heat triggered a graceful, cooling melt that anointed the wearer in a cloud of sanctity and status for hours on end. This journey into the world of the perfume cone reveals just how much fascinating history is waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the science and symbolism of ancient Egyptian life, we would love to hear what other mysteries capture your imagination. What should we explore together next? Perhaps the secret ingredients and rituals behind the sacred incense known as kai-fi. Or the fascinating truth about how the Egyptians really built the pyramids, moving beyond the myths to the actual archaeological evidence. Maybe the powerful role of women like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, who defied tradition to rule as pharaohs. Let us know your suggestions down in the comments. Your curiosity is what fuels our next adventure. If you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By joining our community, you won't miss our next expedition into the lost worlds and forgotten secrets of history. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next journey into the past.